So the man that says he literally said he lies for a living, that's what he did. That was his job. That was his job description. When he woke up in that morning, he knew he was going to lie for a living. When he went to bed that night, he was okay, had no qualms at all with lying over the course of that day. And when he said that in front of an audience full of people, they cheered and they clapped for him. Well, that guy who giggled and laughed and joked and announced how much of a liar he was has gotten caught revealing the truth. It wasn't an audience. It was behind the scenes, and it's on the issue of Venezuela. Welcome to the Soapbox. So my name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Welcome to the show. I hope you guys have had a really good day today. This has been a productive day for me, so this has been pretty good of a day. And yeah, as I started off saying, Maduro, or let's say Mike Pompeo, has gotten caught revealing some things that undercuts Donald Trump's talking points over the course of this last several years. And I want to go through some of these items. And just in case you don't know who Mike Pompeo is, this is Mike Pompeo.
I was the CIA director. We lied, we cheated, we stole. It was like we had entire training courses. It reminds you of the glory of the American experiment.
The glory of the American experiment. Lying, cheating, and stealing is the American experiment. Well, I showed that video because I wanted to give the perspective of Mike Pompeo. I wanted you to know who I was talking about as I showed you that clip. Now, in the context of Venezuela, it looks like Donald Trump has given away his foreign policy to the hawks of his crew, being Bolton and Pompeo. Mike Pompeo has a conversation, and in having this conversation behind the scenes, he gets to have this honest, earnest talk, rare moment of honesty, talking about the failures of the Trump administration with in regards to Venezuela, and having an honest conversation on what is actually taking place in Venezuela and how it is not necessarily an image of the picture that is being portrayed by the United States. Even the Washington Post picks that up. So the first, I copied these articles because I don't have a thing for Washington Post, but this is the article that we're talking about. In secret recordings, Pompeo opens up about Venezuelan opposition and says, "And keeping it united has proven devilishly difficult." There's several points in this article that I want to really point out and I want to nail home. First, the coup, the thing that they called an uprising, it failed. Don't take my word for it failing. The article itself, when Mr. Mike Pompeo makes the point himself that it failed. He expressed regret that during the failed April 30th bid to incite a military uprising, think of what's being said here. In April 30th bid to incite a military uprising, competing interests among Maduro's enemies and rivals prevented the socialist dictator's swift exit. Who do you think was trying to incite that military uprising? He was talking about him, the United States. Now, there are a few oddities associated with this right off the bat, right? Mike Pompeo used to be the CIA director. He was the head spook. And now he's Secretary of State. That's an odd position for a head spook to be in and of itself right off the bat. Those are different value sets. And yet, there he is, nonetheless. And in this case, it was, look, we were trying to incite a coup. It didn't work. It didn't work. And to nail home that I'm not just reading into this, right here. Pompeo said he was confident that Maduro would eventually be forced out, but I couldn't tell you the timing. He said the difficulty of uniting the opposition has been played out in public for the last few months, but since I became CIA director. So this is getting into 2 points. First, the coup failed. It's an acknowledgement that the coup failed. And I hate to, I shouldn't have to keep saying this, but I'll just add a disclaimer. I don't care from the standpoint of American foreign policy, meaning it's none of my business what takes place in Venezuela. This is not me making a pitch for or against Maduro. This is me making a pitch of saying I shouldn't have anything to do with it. My country shouldn't have anything to do with it. We shouldn't be investing resources and time in toppling governments that we don't necessarily like. That's my pitch. It has nothing to do with Maduro at all. It has everything to do about what we do with our tax dollars, what we do with our interests, and how it affects other nations. Do you understand that the very act of us involving ourselves in this prevents negotiations, or at the very least poisons any level of negotiation? You have a superpower backing you. Why would you negotiate? Why would you negotiate? First point, coup failed. Second point, Donald Trump has continuously asserted that there's this kind of united front against Maduro. In fact, all of these guys asserted there's a united front against Maduro. Guaido is that united front. And this was, again, when he points to this notion of an uprising taking place. If you remember, Juan Guaido comes out and calls for an uprising. And in calling for this uprising, he did not get that uprising. Now, the U.S. has been browbeating one country after the next to get those countries to line up in backing this notion of a coup. And that's starting to break down because there are talks in Norway. But again, you have this issue. If you have a superpower backing you,
CIA director, we lied.
What are your incentives? What are your incentives? Like, I'm asking this in just kind of a basic gamesmanship way. You're trying to take power within the country itself. Great. In trying to take power in the country, you have a superpower backing you in your pursuit of trying to take power in the country. Not so great. The superpower that's backing you and that's working with you is tantamount to treason. Now, in this country, when that was taking place, and by the way, just to break this on 2 points. The first point, there is no united front. Donald Trump had often kept saying that there was a united front. Pompeo, in this report, in this leaked information, we were trying to support various religious institutions to get the opposition to come together. There was no united front. There hasn't ever been a united front. He expressed regret that during the failed April 30th bid to incite military uprising, competing interests among Maduro's enemies and rivals prevented a swift exit. Our conundrum, which was to keep the opposition united, has proven difficult, devilishly difficult, Pompeo said in an audio recording obtained by the Washington Post. The moment Maduro leaves, everybody is going to raise their hands and say, "Take me, I'm the next president of Venezuela." It would be a 40 plus people who believed they were the rightful heir to Maduro. These people would be kicking, scraping, gnawing at each other to try to take power. There is no united opposition. That's the point. This notion that Juan Guaido is the head of a united front, it's nonsense. It's a narrative that these guys concocted in order to try to make it okay to topple Maduro. There is no united front. The remarks provide a rare window into the challenges the Trump administration faces as the momentum to oust Maduro stalls in some countries that initially backed the opposition explore alternatives, diplomatic paths to solve the crisis. Meaning the moment that Maduro stays in office and nobody is seeing a way to get Maduro out of office, well, now you have to go through more diplomatic routes as opposed to just a straightforward coup. There are talks right now taking place in Norway, or at the least they were when I was looking at the story. But again, what incentive does the opposition have to earnestly engage in these talks if it earnestly believes that a superpower is backing it to take power in their country? Pompeo's point is there is no united opposition. Last point, treasonous. Outright treasonous. We in this country take an odd perspective of things. What do I mean by odd perspective of things? We're literally looking at a story in the Washington Post where the United States is working with people in another country and working with various leaders of factions within other country to try to cobble those factions together to support them materially with resources and propaganda in order to topple the government of that country. He just announced when they were trying to have the military uprising, the military coup in April. Understand what this means. Our country have been screaming at the height of our lungs that Facebook and Twitter ads tantamount to an attack on democracy itself. And in the Washington Post, we're reading in black and white in this weird perspective of things that doesn't quite take that into account, that we're talking about a coup for somebody else's country. I'm not saying Maduro is a great guy or that you want to have coffee with him. I'm saying it has nothing to do with Maduro. I'm saying it has everything to do with whether or not you want your country using the brute force of its military, or for that matter, its economic arm, to strangle a country. Do you realize there have been tens of thousands of deaths in a country as a result of sanctions? Sanctions, no, are not necessarily war, but let's be very clear, they are an act of war. Back during the Iraq period, when Bill Clinton put sanctions on Iraq, do you realize 500,000 kids died based on those sanctions? No, it wasn't an invasion, but was it an act of war? And did it cause massive amounts of deaths? Yes. Is the same thing true in Venezuela? Yes. All of this notion of Maduro being a bad guy, he may be a bad guy, but understand the sanctions and what we're doing economically, strangling that country, is affecting the people of that country. And the whole point of it is affect the people of that country, to make life so inhospitable that they somehow topple their elected government. It's astonishing that we're okay with this. We scream about it when it happened to us. But we are not just strangling the economy of the country. We are also working with people in the country to materially assist them to topple the elected government of their country. And for people to say, oh, it wasn't elected, it was a fraudulent election, the opposition was working with the United States government in order to make sure that election was shady. Let's be honest. Let's be clear what it is. This is none of our business. What takes place in Venezuela is for the people of Venezuela. That's my point. Pompeo, in his rare moment of honesty, is admitting in this country it would be treasonous what those people in Venezuela was doing, meaning what Guaido was doing, being the patsy in this case, working with the United States in order to try to elect or overthrow the government of the country itself. That would be treasonous. Whatever you want to think of Maduro, if that happened in this country, it would be treasonous. It would be treasonous. Pompeo is admitting to it. It's just an odd point of view. I don't understand how we look at this stuff in other countries where we're taking down other governments, where it's overt, it's open. There's no qualm about it. Donald Trump is openly talking about taking down the government of another country in multiple cases, be it Iran, be it Venezuela, be it North Korea, and even in the context of other governments that are supposed to be sovereign, they're supposed to be friends of ours, telling them that they can't use particular technology because we don't particularly like it, telling them that they can't use certain missile systems. It's astonishing. It's astonishing. Is it really your government business to do all of these things? I understand that when they make the argument that he's a bad guy, it makes it okay to do this kind of humanitarian bombing, as if the bombings, or if the military interventions, or if splitting the military off and having one side fighting for Guaido and the other side fighting Maduro is somehow beneficial to the people of Venezuela. It is not. I guarantee you, the military actions, the bombings, the killings, those things will happen across the board. It's not like those bullets are magical where they don't hit various innocent people. Either way, Pompeo admits that they failed in Venezuela. And it's not necessarily that they've just given up and gone home, but at the very least, up to this point, they have failed in Venezuela, and he admits as such. By the way, Juan Guaido may consider himself to be the safest man on the planet right now because despite committing treason at the height of his lungs, overtly so, Maduro can't touch him. That said, I would be very careful if I was Juan Guaido, because the fact that Maduro stayed in office, the U.S. is looking for a pretext. And the head of the Secretary of State used to be the director of the CIA. And his perspective on how to get things accomplished go beyond, I would imagine, just diplomacy. I would be very careful if I was Juan Guaido, not from Maduro, but from elements of the intelligence services that are looking for the next shoe to drop in order to allow them a pretext to get further involved in Venezuela. I'll end this here because I didn't want this one to go long, and this one has gone far longer than I wanted, and I was probably repeating myself. Damn it. All right. If you guys enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support through PayPal or Patreon. And even $1 helps. Considering what they've been doing with this notion of the ad apocalypse, definitely consider helping the creators that you listen to and that you find yourself going to often. So I'll leave it here. Thanks all.